It is now my great pleasure to introduce Abbey Wemimo. Abbey is the founder of a very interesting fintech company called Isuzu. Abbey, welcome to Digitally United.
James, thanks a lot, and just delighted to be here today.
Tell us a little bit about what Isuzu is and how it is that you came to launch this company.
So Isuzu is a platform that works with large multifamily owners and operators to do three things. Number one, we help them predict which residents will pay rent on time next month. And for folks that can't pay rent, we offer them with a micro loan paid directly to the landlord. And then for folks paying rent on time, report their on-time rental data into the credit rating agencies to either build or establish their credit scores. You might ask why that is important. Personally, for me, when my mother and I immigrated from Lagos, Nigeria, we didn't have a credit score. We walked into one of the biggest banks to borrow money in Minneapolis. We were turned away and had to go borrow money at over 400% interest rate from a payday loan lender. In addition to that, my mother pawned my father's ring, and that's how we got our start in this country. So really inspired by that experience, we started Isuzu on three core principles: where you come from, the color of your skin, and particularly something like your credit score should never determine where you end up on the wealthiest nation on the surface of the earth.
Yeah, it's so interesting, this notion of immigrants not having established credit. You know, I recently interviewed a woman with a very similar experience, except that she was from Korea and she couldn't get a credit card, and she has now launched a company called Tomo Credit that helps people with no credit history get credit cards. So was it the case that paying your rent on time hasn't affected your credit score in the past? It seems like kind of an obvious thing, but when I think about like Credit Karma and those sites, they're looking at my credit card usage. They're not asking me if I'm paying rent. I guess it's different if you have a mortgage, right? But if you're just a renter, has that historically not helped your credit score?
Precisely, it hasn't. So what we've seen in our society today is if you have a mortgage or some kind of debt obligation, that data is reported, and then they measure your ability to essentially pay back that debt obligation. With recent legislation, actually around 2013, allowed things like rental data and other utilities to be reported to build people's credit score. And this is important, James, because folks that predominantly don't have a good credit score are low to medium income folks and predominantly Black or other minority groups. So what we've done is since 2013, since this initiative has been promoted by the government, we've driven policy through execution. We can now do it for large multifamily owners and operators, capture their rental payment, report it into the credit bureaus. And then for folks that can't pay rent, give them a micro loan so we're not solving homelessness backwards as a society. So today we're doing it. Our partners have 1.3 million rental units in 43 states.
Wow, that's bigger than I thought. I love that idea of not solving homelessness backwards. That's a very powerful way of putting it. So if I'm a landlord, why would I want to use Isuzu? Why don't I just get a check from my tenants or get a money order or get payment in cash like I always have? What's the value for the landlord in this equation?
So what we tell landlord is your residents are your most important asset, right? Just like in companies, your people are your most important asset. So if your residents are financially resilient, it gives you an opportunity to make sure cash flow is healthy. So why should you work with Isuzu? Three things. Number one, if a resident cannot pay rent, we can predict that for you prior. We always say you can't fix what you can't measure. And it's better for you to know what can kill you than it's actually killing you when you find out. So we help predict, but when we predict, we also then offer those that can afford to pay rent a loan paid directly to you, the landlord, which no one in the marketplace does. So the residents stay, you as a landlord are making money, right? And then the residents are also not going through stress. and they're not, and as a society, we're not dealing with homelessness. And then for residents that don't have a good credit history, we can help them report that rental data, and it drives on-time payments by 25% for the landlord. So it's a win-win across for everyone involved. Landlord, cash is healthy, more resilient residents with leverage because they have good credit scores. And as a society, we're not dealing with a ton of homelessness through services like Isusu.
And how do you predict whether someone is going to be late with their rent payments? What do you, is this because of data that you're capturing?
Exactly. Isusu is connected to 70% of the large property management platforms in the country. There are 110 million people that rent in this country, 36% of the population. We are integrated into 70% of the marketplace through large integration. So when we capture that data and a whole bunch of other information, we're able to tell the real propensity of a resident to pay, not just an hypothesis allotted to them. So we see the potential, can work with the landlord to understand what the risk profile of a building looks like. And then the so what is the treatment we apply, which is either helping them boost their credit score or offering them a good interest loan, so they are not being kicked out or evicted.
I know you launched the business before the COVID pandemic set in and the various lockdowns and high unemployment. How did COVID affect your business?
So COVID played a huge part in our business. Prior to the COVID-19 crisis, I think our partners only had 250,000 rental units in roughly 25 states. With COVID, the landlords we work with and the property managers understood the importance of figuring out their residents' risk. So since COVID, we've grown, over 600+%, and that number continues to jump up every day. And it's simple. We've always come out there and said we're going to outperform in a down market because low to medium income people are the fringe. As a society, we're not paying people enough. And then when we look at the disparities of the racial wealth gap, majority of the people we focus on are low to medium income people that have not been given a chance. So now, during COVID, was a great opportunity to show some of these things we've been talking about, because we've been dealing with the symptom of the issues before, not the root causes. But in this case, we're showing data to landlords and saying, this is how we can help. And residents love this because for the first time, this is not just a service haranguing them to nickel and dime them. This is actually a service that can help them be more financially prosperous. So the growth has been, exemplary for us. We've outperformed as a company, and now, grown our team from roughly 20 people to close to 40 people today.
That's great. And I should tell all the viewers, if you have a question for Abbey, please enter it in the chat. Happy to pass those along. Abbey, I think some of the folks on this call know that I wear another hat, which is I run a newsletter called Fin, which is devoted to the fintech business, and I meet a lot of CEOs. I talk to a lot of CEOs who are in this space of trying to use technology to serve the unbanked, the underbanked, this segment of the population, which is quite large, that doesn't have the best access to financial services. Can you talk a little bit about this movement and your role in it?
Absolutely. So, let's take a step back. As a company, what we stand for is essentially to leverage the power of data to bridge the racial wealth gap. That's literally our vision statement. Because we think until the United States and any other country in the world actually comes and doesn't face the reality of racial reckoning, we're building a mansion on a sinking sand. So that's number one. So if we also go back, to the root causes of what happened, some people might ask, why do we have the average white family has 10 times as much wealth than the average Black family, right? It goes back to the history of what we've done as a nation. In the 20s and the 30s, the housing authorities, right, essentially said Black folks could not have mortgages backed by the full force of the government, which was not a privilege that was afforded to others. So to that end, what we find ourselves is of that 10 times as much wealth, 76% of that is actually home ownership. So what we are trying to do right now is leverage the power of data through our reporting capabilities to better understand the risk profile of people that are traditionally left behind. I don't think my mother and I were horrible people, right? I don't think the banker that denied us, in Minneapolis is also, a terrible person. We just don't have a good way to understand the risk profile of low to medium income people that do not have a credit history. And that's where we play a quintessential role, not just to talk about the issues from a rhetoric standpoint, but rather to find solutions by reporting data that are not usually reported into the credit rating agencies so we can better understand people's risk profile rather than penalize them for not having a particular debt obligation.
No, it's a true revolution what you're creating. I guess one of the issues, I don't think you were here at the beginning of the conference, but we had the CEO of the Harris poll, and he gave us all this fascinating data about inequality, and one of the stats that really popped out at me was 26% of Black Americans said that they don't have access to mobile banking. This is exactly the population that you're trying to reach. So how do you bridge that gap if the very tools that are needed to make your product work aren't in the right hands?
It's a fantastic question. So that's an infrastructure issue, right? How do we essentially get the hardware to folks that have predominantly been left behind to get access to it? There are a lot of platforms out there. There are a lot of companies out there trying to get things like even broadband is an issue in terms of what we face right now. So they're partners of us from a client standpoint. They're just providing free Wi-Fi for their workforce housing, their Section 8 housing, or their voucher-based housing, or any affordable form of housing. That's what we need to do as a society, because there's a saying: if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you fundamentally go together. That's the true essence of what we stand for. The portion we are currently focused on is how do we get those people's financial identity. But we work with a plethora of partners, from broadband providers to hardware providers, so we get that access so we can pick up the slack. It takes a village, right? And we're just a member of that tribe to make sure folks can get that permanent bridge to financial access and inclusion. We cannot do it alone. There's a role for government, there's a role for corporations, there's a role for other startups we consider partners, but it takes a coalition to essentially make this happen.
Well, Abbey, I can't think of a better note on which to end a session at a panel called Digitally United than that rousing call for cooperation. I really want to thank you for joining us today, and wish you all the best with Isuzu.
Thank you so much, James, and such a delight to be here.
Great to see you.